Beauty doesn't matter. It's what's inside that counts. That was what Mira's mother whispered as she brushed her daughter's mousy brown hair. Mira clung to those words even after her mother died. Even after her father left her behind with only memories and broken promises. When he returned, he did not come alone. He brought a flame-haired wife and a son made of starlight. Cade was everything Mira was not. Striking, graceful, magnetic. Even his wolf shimmered like burnished copper. Mira's was ordinary brown, forgettable. Her stepmother's love belonged to Cade. Her father's pride belonged to Cade. The pack's admiration, the elders' favor, the visiting alpha's attention, always Cade. And Mira was left with scraps, a distracted nod, a cramped room in the servant's wing, and her mother's hollow refrain. "Don't sulk, dear," Vera would say whenever Mira's longing for affection became too obvious. Jealousy is unbecoming, especially in one so plain. Vera was masterful in her cruelty. When their father was home, she'd acknowledge Mira with one careless hand while embracing Cade with both arms. She'd mention Mira's difficult moods and resentful tendencies with perfect maternal concern. "She's not like Cade," Vera would tell their father when she thought Mira couldn't hear. And their father, tired from territorial disputes and dazzled by his new family's brilliance, would nod. But Mira had her mother's words to sustain her. Beauty doesn't matter. It's what's inside that counts. She threw herself into learning. Languages, mathematics, history. She read every treaty, studied every diplomatic strategy, sharpened her mind like a blade. And at last someone noticed. A powerful beta came seeking not Cade's beauty, but the clever girl. For one shining moment, her mother's words seemed true. That night, Vera brought her warm tea and a smile sweet as poison. Mira drank, dreaming of love and worth at last. She should have known better. When she woke the next morning and saw what she had become, she finally understood the truth her mother had been too kind to tell her. Perhaps you didn't need to be the most beautiful for your inner worth to matter. But when you became the ugliest creature imaginable, you learned that appearance would always matter more. And Mira looked at herself in the cracked mirror above her wash basin and screamed until her throat was raw. The children had made up songs about Mira. Hide face, covered in the day. Show your cursed features and we'll run away. Lock your doors and bar your gates. Or hide face will seal your fates. Their high, sweet voices carried across the cobblestones, pausing only when their mothers hushed them with nervous glances in Mira's direction. Years had passed since she'd first been cursed, and she now kept to the edges of every village she passed through, moving through the markets like a shadow wrapped in a hooded cloak and veil. Even so, she couldn't hide entirely. Parents covered their children's eyes when she passed, whispered prayers under their breath as if her very presence might contaminate their souls. "Please," she whispered to the herb seller, keeping her voice low. "Just a loaf of bread for these mushrooms. They're good ones, chanterelles, hard to find." The woman didn't look at her directly. "Keep moving, hide face," she muttered. "You're frightening my customers." Mira glanced around the empty market stall. There were no customers to frighten. There never were when she appeared, no matter how briefly. She pulled her veil lower, trying to conceal the perceived crime that was now her appearance. Twisted scars covered her face in grotesque patterns, her features warped as if melted by fire. Patches of diseased-looking skin mottled her cheeks and forehead. Her eyes had sunken deep into her skull, ringed with darkness. When she'd opened her mouth to scream that first morning, she'd discovered her teeth had turned black and jagged. She was caught between forms. Not beautiful, not even plain, but something grotesque that belonged nowhere. Vera had laughed when she discovered her that morning years ago, her beautiful face bright with malicious joy. "Don't pout, child." That beta needed to see that Cade was his only option. "But your curse will break." Her eyes had glittered with false sympathy. "When someone willingly bonds with you as their mate, seeing you as you truly are." Then she dissolved into cackles, because they both knew the truth. No one would ever choose to bind themselves to a monster. Even other shifters who should have understood the complexity of dual natures saw her as an abomination. She was cursed in their minds, something that might be contagious. So she'd made her home in the deep wilderness, traded her knowledge of herbs and healing for the basics she needed to survive: bread, cloth, the occasional bit of meat when she was very lucky. It wasn't much of a life, but it was life, and some days that felt like victory enough. Today was not one of those days. She was making her way toward the village outskirts, her meager purchases tucked safely in her satchel, when she heard the commotion near the well. A crowd had gathered around something, their voices tight with anger and fear. I tell you it was her. A woman's voice rose above the rest. Who else would do such a thing? Hideface will be the death of us all if we don't act. Mira's blood went cold. She knew that voice. Goodwife Renly, a sharp-faced woman who had been calling for Mira's banishment from the village since the day she'd first appeared seeking trade. Renly's youngest daughter had been born with a facial deformity, and she'd somehow convinced herself that Mira's presence was to blame for the child's condition. We should have run her off months ago, Renly continued, her voice growing shriller. Now look what's happened. Poor Widow Marth's chickens. All of them slaughtered in the night, torn apart like they'd been mauled by some wild beast. Mira's stomach dropped. She'd heard nothing about chickens, had been nowhere near the widow's farm. But the crowd was already murmuring agreement, fear overriding logic. She started to back away, but it was too late. Renly's sharp eyes found her in the crowd, and her face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. There, she shrieked, pointing directly at Mira. There's Hideface herself. The crowd turned as one, and Mira found herself surrounded by a sea of hostile faces. I didn't, she started, but her words were lost in the angry shouts. Strong hands seized her arms before she could think to run. The village constable wouldn't meet her eyes as he bound her wrists with iron shackles. Sorry, Hideface, he muttered, but there's been a complaint made formal-like. Have to take you before the Alpha King for judgment. But I didn't do anything, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Please, you know I wouldn't. Do I? He glanced at her veiled face. Can't say I know what you might do looking like, well, like that. Behind him, Goodwife Renly smiled with savage satisfaction. Justice at last, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The Alpha King will know how to deal with creatures like this one. As they dragged her toward the waiting cart, Mira caught a glimpse of movement near Widow Marth's fence. Chickens pecking peacefully at the ground around her feet. Alive, unharmed, every single one of them. But by then, it was too late for truth to matter. It always was when you looked like a monster. The cart to the Alpha King's palace was crammed with thieves, poachers, and debtors who whispered in their chains. Mira shrank into a shadowed corner, her veil drawn low, listening. Heard the king grows harsher, muttered a gap-toothed man. All on account of his daughters. Poor princesses, sighed a milk seller. Wasting away like they're drained of life. Worn slippers every morning, though they never leave their chambers. Magic, hissed the thief. What else? Remember the scholar who tried to solve it? Vanished. The healer woman, too. People don't dare anymore. The king offers any reward, the woman whispered. But what good's a reward if you never return? Mira's mind began to race. 5 princesses growing weaker each day, people disappearing when they tried to help, and a king desperate enough to promise any reward. A plan began to form in her mind, desperate and dangerous, and perfectly suited to someone who had nothing left to lose. The palace loomed before them like a fortress of white stone, its towers piercing the sky like accusations. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs as they were herded through iron gates and stone corridors. They reached the great hall, the Hall of Eternal Flame, one of the guards called it, and Mira's breath caught in her throat. The vast chamber was dimly lit, illuminated only by braziers that cast dancing shadows on the walls. But at the center of the hall grew something extraordinary. A massive tree with silver bark and leaves that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Its branches stretched nearly to the vaulted ceiling, and flowers like captured moonlight hung heavy from its boughs. Beautiful, isn't it? The milk seller whispered. The king's miracle tree. They say his wealth flows from its blossoms. He prizes it more than his crown. Reluctantly, Mira tore her gaze away as the prisoners were arranged before the throne. Do you admire my treasure, thief? The king's voice cut the air like a blade. Perhaps you dream of stealing it. On his dark throne sat a man carved from war, broad-shouldered, scarred, silver threading his black hair, eyes like flint. At his feet sat 5 princesses, pale and worn, like flowers left too long without water. Mira forced her voice steady. No thief could carry away such a tree, your majesty. It would take an army. The king's mouth twitched. And yet you stand accused of slaughtering livestock. Your tongue will not spare you. Tell me your name. They call me Hideface, your majesty, she said, chin lifting. And I am no criminal. If words cannot save me, perhaps my actions will. His eyes narrowed. Hideface. Why so? She ignored him, seizing the moment. I have heard of your daughter's affliction. The hall grew still. The king leaned forward, menace sharpening his voice. Have you now? Then answer me properly. Why do they call you Hideface? What hides beneath that veil? The command brooked no refusal. With trembling hands, Mira removed her veil. Gasps swept the hall. Courtiers shrank back in horror. A woman screamed. Someone retched. Only the king remained unmoved, though his jaw tightened. A curse, then? He asked coldly. Yes, your majesty, she straightened, which is why I have nothing left to lose. I offer myself to discover what afflicts your daughters. In exchange for? Freedom and the favor you promised the others, Mira replied. His eyes flared. Your freedom should be favor enough. With respect, your majesty, I risk my life. Others vanished attempting this, which is why none dare try now. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of flames. The Alpha King leaned forward in his throne, and for a moment Mira thought he might order her execution on the spot. Very well, he said. 3 days, starting tonight. Solve the mystery, and you shall have freedom and any favor you desire. Fail, and I execute you as planned. The silver tree shimmered faintly, its beauty tugging at her heart. Around the throne, the princesses watched with eyes like dying stars. I accept, Mira said, and her voice did not waver. Mira was lodged in a small chamber beside the princesses' rooms, given only a narrow cot and a guttering candle. I'll be watching you, one guard growled, taking up post. One wrong move toward their highnesses, and curse or no curse, I'll run you through. But the 5 princesses themselves seemed too weary to care about Mira. They lay on their beds like wilted blossoms, their lovely faces pale and drawn. Though near midnight, one princess rose as if sleepwalking. She drifted toward Mira with a gentle smile, bearing a steaming cup. A warm drink for our lady-in-waiting, she murmured. The kindness in her voice nearly undid Mira, but memory flared. Another cup, another night. Vera's poisoned tea and false maternal blessing. Thank you, your highness, Mira said. When the princess turned away, she poured the liquid into her cloak and feigned sleep. The guard accepted his own cup and soon collapsed into snores. An hour passed, then movement. The princesses rose together, not in nightclothes now, but gowns of silk and starlight. Wordless, they pressed upon an ordinary stretch of floor, which opened to reveal a hidden stair. Mira shook the guard, but he was lost in drugged slumber. With no choice, she followed the sisters into the dark. The stairs spiraled endlessly until at last light blossomed ahead, an impossible radiance. Mira emerged onto a wide avenue lined with trees whose trunks were not painted silver, but silver itself, gleaming as if freshly forged. The sky glowed in perpetual twilight, violet and amber washing every surface with unearthly beauty. And music swelled. Harps, flutes, voices in perfect harmony that brought tears to her eyes. Yet unease prickled Mira's skin. The place was too flawless, too dreamlike. The avenue ended at a crystalline lake, and at the shore waited boats, each steered by radiant young men. The princesses stepped without hesitation into the boats. But as the vessels drifted across the lake, Mira felt her breath catch. How could she follow now? Does the lady need a ride? The voice came from directly beside her, smooth and tinged with amusement. Mira spun around to find a man lounging in his own boat, arms crossed casually. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, and his features sharp and elegant, with eyes that shifted between violet and deep silver, like twilight itself. Mira's breath caught, and she quickly pulled her veil back over her face. I have nothing to pay you with, sir, she mumbled. Then I shall require no payment, he said, extending one graceful hand toward her. Come. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, but the princesses were already halfway across the lake, and she had no other choice. She climbed into the boat carefully, pointedly not taking his offered hand. She couldn't bear the thought of him touching her ruined face, even through fabric. Would the lady like me to take her to the ball? He asked, pushing off from the shore. The ball? Mira blinked. Well, what did you think the music was for? His smile widened. The ball. That must be where the princesses were going. Yes, she said quickly. Yes, please. The man pulled the boat with effortless skill, humming along with the distant music. When they reached the far shore, he leaped out with a dancer's grace and offered his hand again. Mira ignored it once more, keeping her face carefully turned away from him. It made him laugh. I do not care about your curse, mortal child. Mira gasped, quickly ducking her face back into the shadows of her veil. Very well, she heard him say. Keep your secrets if you must. He gestured toward a path that led through gardens more beautiful than paradise itself. What Mira saw next stole what remained of her composure entirely. The ball unfolded within a vast garden pavilion, carved as though from a single amethyst. Diamond and sapphire pillars held aloft a ceiling open to twilight as hundreds of radiant figures moved across the floor, light as air. And at the heart of it all danced the 5 princesses, whirling endlessly. "What is this place?" Mira breathed. "The Twilight Court, of course," her companion replied. "The Twilight Court," Mira repeated. "The kingdom of the Fae." But as she looked around at the otherworldly perfection of every face and form, she knew it had to be true. Only magic could create such a place. She was about to ask more when she noticed the other Fae were pointing and laughing. And for a horrible moment, she thought they were mocking her until her companion spoke again. "They find your princesses quite amusing," he said, his tone light but edged with something darker. "Why?" Mira asked. "Well, they do look rather silly, don't they?" He tilted his head. "Dancing themselves to death like wind-up toys. They won't last very long at this rate." Horror shot through Mira. She started forward, meaning to grab one of the princesses to shake her awake. "Useless," her companion said. "They won't hear a word you tell them. They've been compelled to come here." "By what?" Mira demanded. "By whom, you mean?" the man replied. Mira gritted her teeth. "Fine. By whom?" "They're here for the Fae Lord's amusement," he said, gesturing toward the far end of the pavilion. Mira followed his gaze to where a figure sat, watching the dancers with an expression of profound boredom. "He doesn't seem very amused," she observed. "Oh, believe me, he very much is." The callousness in his tone made Mira's stomach turn. "I have to be going," she said, taking a step back. She had her answer. The princesses were being compelled by some Fae magic to dance themselves to death. But now a new fear crept in. Would this beautiful otherworldly creature simply let her leave? "Dance with me first?" he asked, and for a moment his beautiful face showed something that looked almost like sincere hope. Mira's heart stuttered. "I cannot," she said. "You've been most kind, but I need to report back." "To your alpha," he guessed. Mira started to fabricate some excuse, but he interrupted her with a raised hand. "You should bring him proof," he said, "or he might not believe you." He didn't believe the others. "The others? You think you're the only one who's managed to find this place?" "Far from it. There were others who tried to warn your king. But who would believe such fantastical words? Your world has long forgotten ours." Mira blinked. Was this what had happened to the others who had tried and disappeared? They'd found this place, returned with wild stories of Fae kingdoms, and been dismissed as mad. She looked around desperately for something she could take as evidence. "Perhaps a flower from that vine," her companion suggested, pointing to crystal blossoms that sparkled. "No one will miss it." Mira glanced around the pavilion. The other Fae were absorbed in their dancing and laughter. "Thank you," she murmured, reaching for the flower. The moment her fingers closed around it, she felt something settle over her. Invisible but heavy, like chains made of air and shadow. "Oh no," the man said, his smile turning sharp. "Thank you for giving me such a good reason to keep you here." Mira stared at him in growing horror. "A reason," she repeated. "Well, yes. There are rules, you see. We can't keep mortals here against their will unless—" His smile widened. "Unless," Mira's voice came out as a whisper. Around them, she realized the dancing had stopped. Every beautiful face in the pavilion was turned toward them. "Unless the mortal steals something from my realm, of course." The man gestured toward the crystal flower, which you did. "You said I could take it," Mira snarled. "I said you should, not that you could." His expression was mockingly sympathetic. "I didn't give it to you, did I? Which means you've stolen from me." She'd been played, Mira realized. "You tricked me," she spat. "I demand to speak to your lord about this." "Very well," the man said, executing a perfect mocking bow. "You're looking at him." When she stared at him blankly, he straightened with evident amusement. "Lysander," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of ancient power and terrible beauty. "Fae Lord of the Twilight Court, at your service." Mira stared at the beautiful man before her, her mind reeling. "You're the Lord." "Indeed, I am," the Fae replied with evident amusement. "Then what were you doing lounging around in a boat?" Mira exclaimed. His smile widened. "I happen to like boats," he shrugged. Mira's face fell. He'd orchestrated this entire thing, hadn't he? Led her step by step into stealing that crystal flower. "Keep me here if you must," she said. "But let the poor princesses go." You said so yourself. They won't last long if this keeps going. That's hardly my problem, is it? The Lord shrugged. They've done nothing wrong, Mira protested. Maybe not, his eyes grew cold. But their eldest sister bargained with me and lost. This was the price agreed upon. Mira scoffed. You mean you lied to them just like you lied to me? She accepted our terms, Lysander's voice snapped. I'm no liar. Then prove it, Mira said desperately. Give me a chance to free them. You want a bargain? The Fey Lord raised one elegant eyebrow. Yes, Mira nodded. In exchange for the princess's freedom. The Fey Lord studied her with those shifting violet-silver eyes. My lovely subjects, he finally said, turning to his court. I find myself reluctant to bargain with someone who will not show themselves to me fully. For how can I judge the worth of a hidden player? The assembled Fae began to murmur encouragement. They wanted to see the cursed mortal, Mira realized. Come now, Lysander encouraged. Show us your curse, mortal. The challenge in his tone left her no choice. With trembling hands, Mira removed her veil. Interesting, Lysander murmured, studying her transformed features. Mira heard several murmurs, but to her surprise, they didn't sound horrified, merely curious. I don't understand, one of the courtiers said. She looks like a perfectly normal human, does she not? No, you fool, another replied. The normal ones have far less scarring. Mira flushed but forced herself to stand straight. What is your name? Lysander asked. They call me Hideface, your grace, Mira said quietly. And what do you call yourself? The Lord insisted. I've long forgotten to call myself anything else, Mira murmured. The Fey Lord frowned in strange displeasure. Very well, Hideface. Then name your bargain. Mira took a deep breath. Give me a chance to earn your mercy and save the princesses, she said. The Fey Lord's smile was sharp as a blade. I will give you 3 trials, he said. Complete them all, and both you and the princesses may return to your realm. But when you fail, his eyes glittered with dark promise, I will transform you into a statue to grace my gardens for all eternity. Well, I was going to be stuck here forever anyway, Mira replied with forced lightness. Seems fair to me. But you could still move, still speak. The Lord shook his head. As a statue, you would be trapped in silent immobility forever. Mira managed a bitter smile. When I move, people flinch. When I speak, they recoil. At least as an immobile statue, I won't horrify others. Something flickered across the Fey Lord's face. Something that looked almost like pain. All right, he said. Then it is a deal. Freedom if you win, statue form if you lose. Mira had no choice. The princesses were dying, and this was their only hope. She nodded. The bargain is struck, Lysander said. Should Hideface win, the princesses can go free. Should she fail, I'll transform them into statues as well. Mira gasped. Now wait a minute, she interjected. You never mentioned you'd turn the princesses into statues. But I never said I wouldn't, did I? The Lord interrupted. And in my opinion, they'd make fine statues. I could perhaps place them around the fountain. Send 1 or 2 to your Alpha King as a gift. Horror shot through Mira as Lysander's eyes met hers, violet silver and far too beautiful. She'd made a terrible mistake. For if the Fae couldn't lie, it seems they'd become masters at bending the truth. You tricked me, Mira muttered. Indeed, the Lord smiled. You see, you didn't have to bargain with me to earn your freedom at all. You could have just given me back the flower. He winked as Mira growled. Turning to his court, the Fey Lord announced, Now let's begin. The crystal pavilion dissolved around them like mist. In its place appeared a grand banquet hall with a long table groaning under the weight of sumptuous foods. The Fey court materialized around it, as if they'd always been there. How did we move so quickly? Mira asked. We haven't moved at all, Lysander replied from across the table. Mira stared at him. If he couldn't lie, then this meant he could create illusions at will, reshaping reality with nothing more than a gesture. Everything here could be false. Everything could change in an instant. The realization was both terrifying and oddly fascinating. Your first trial, Lysander announced, gesturing to the table where 2 chalices sat elevated in the center. One crafted from gold that caught the light, the other a humble clay cup that looked rough and unglazed. You must choose one chalice to drink from. Only one is safe and poison-free. Mira approached the table cautiously. I have to guess which one is safe. Does that mean I can ask for hints? She asked. You can ask me whatever you like, Lysander said, settling into a chair. But that doesn't mean I'll answer. Because you might lie? Mira asked, testing. The Fey Lord's expression shifted to one of genuine offense. I told you, mortal, we Fey do not lie. But you lied before. When you told me that other man was the Fey Lord, Mira pointed out. I did not, Lysander replied smoothly. I said the princesses were here for the Fey Lord's amusement, and you assumed. Mira bit back a frustrated growl and studied the chalices more closely. If I choose wrong, I'll die? She asked, meeting Lysander's violet-silver gaze. Yes, he confirmed without hesitation. And the princesses will be turned into statues. They will, the Fey Lord nodded. Mira noted he didn't seem particularly invested in her fate. But the princesses, there was something there. A deliberate coldness that felt practiced. Why do this to them? She asked. I told you, Lysander said with a shrug. I'd like to turn them into statues and send them to your Alpha King. But if that were true, Mira realized, why hadn't he simply done it from the beginning? Why keep them dancing night after night, slowly dying of exhaustion, when he could have transformed them instantly? There had to be rules governing his actions. Magical bonds that constrained even a Fey Lord's power. Mira leaned closer to the chalices, inhaling carefully. Both wines smelled identical. Was that another illusion? One of these chalices contains poison, she confirmed. Yes, Lysander said. And one does not. Correct. And you cannot lie. I cannot. His tone was almost indulgent, as if he were enjoying her methodical approach. Mira stepped back, studying the cups again. This wasn't a game of pure chance. If it were, both chalices would look identical. The dramatic difference between them had to be significant. One beautiful, one plain. One that would naturally attract attention, one that would be overlooked. I wonder if this is a test of character, she murmured. Obviously, most people would choose the golden cup. It's more appealing than that clay thing. Obviously, Lysander agreed, and she caught a glint of amusement in his eyes. Unless, of course, that's exactly what you want me to think. Mira paused, her mind racing. That this is about humility, that I should choose the plain cup when it's actually the golden one that's safe. The Fey Lord's smile stretched wider. That would be quite deceitful of me. He hadn't actually answered, just deflected with another observation. Mira found herself oddly charmed by his evasiveness. There was an artistry to it. Which one would you choose to drink from? She asked. The one that doesn't contain poison, of course, he replied smoothly. Despite her frustration, Mira felt her lips twitch. Words held meaning here. One had to use them carefully. Can you tell me if this cup contains poison? She asked, pointing to the golden chalice. Yes, I can, Lysander said, clearly enjoying himself. When he said nothing more, Mira tried again, this time even more precise. Does this cup contain poison? She said, pointing to the golden cup. It very well could, couldn't it? The Lord tilted his head thoughtfully. Then again, perhaps it's the other one that does. Mira found herself studying his face with growing fascination. This poison you put into the cups, she said, changing tactics. Is it deadly? Yes, Lysander replied, beginning to sound bored. Mira held back a grin. He didn't think she could actually get anything out of him, and this was something she could work with. How would it kill me? She asked innocently. Would I suffer? Not too terribly, no, he shrugged. We're civilized here, aren't we? The assembled court laughed, but Mira paid them no mind. This poison you mentioned, if you were to drink it, would it kill you too? Yes, Lysander said. If I were to drink enough of it. I see, Mira nodded, acting scared. And is there enough poison in the poison cups to kill even you? Yes, there is, he said uncaringly. But then he caught on, and his eyes widened as Mira grinned triumphant. Right, she said. So that means both cups are poisoned, since you just confirmed there's enough poison in the poison cups, plural, to kill even a Fey Lord. The court fell silent, and Lysander stared at her with an expression of surprise and annoyance. But you said only one chalice was safe, Mira continued thoughtfully. That means there has to be a safe option. There is a way for me to win this challenge, right? Yes, the Lord admitted with visible reluctance. The court began murmuring excitedly. Even Lysander looked intrigued despite his annoyance. Oh, but Hideface, he said with false innocence. You didn't ask how much time you had left. Ice shot through Mira's veins. How much time do I have left? She asked. As of now, Lysander glanced at nothing in particular. 1 minute. Mira's mind raced. She was almost out of time. She had to think, and fast. The Fey Lord couldn't lie. He'd told her one cup was safe, but also that multiple cups contained poison. Right now, Mira could only see 2 cups. But if both were poisoned and one was safe. 30 seconds, Lysander announced cheerfully. Mira thought of the easy way the Lord had transformed the ballroom into a banquet hall. It was all an illusion, which meant that just because she couldn't actually see a 3rd cup didn't mean there wasn't one. Lysander had never actually said she had to choose between these 2 cups. He just said she had to choose the safe cup. Mira began running her hands across the table's surface around the visible chalices, searching desperately. You know, Lysander said conversationally, for a mortal, you're not a complete fool. Mira looked up to find him watching her with undisguised interest. Then her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, like glass. An invisible chalice right where she'd hoped it would be. She grabbed the unseen cup and drained it. Well? She asked breathlessly. Lysander's annoyed expression was answer enough, and Mira almost cheered. But then the colors around her began to shift and swirl. I guessed right, didn't I? She asked, her voice coming out strangely giddy. The Fey Lord said nothing, just watched with those mesmerizing eyes as she began to giggle. Everything was so lovely, so wonderfully bright and spinning. Only when she hit the stone floor did she realize she might have been wrong after all. When Mira woke next, her head still spun with lingering dizziness. She was lying in a bower of living trees, their intertwined branches forming a bed around her. And beside her, lounging in a chair that seemed grown from the garden itself, sat Lysander. I don't know if I'm impressed or annoyed, little mortal, he said when their eyes met. Mira struggled to sit up. Did I guess right? She asked. You did, Lysander confirmed. Then, seeing her questioning look, he added, drinking or eating anything from this realm will have effects when you are mortal, even when it isn't poison. Mira nodded slowly. Come, the Fey Lord said. Walk with me while you recover fully. Lysander guided her through the gardens toward what appeared to be a hedge maze with walls formed of roses that bloomed in impossible colors. Deep purple, midnight black, silver white. In the distance, a magnificent palace rose against the twilight sky, its towers seeming to pierce the very stars. As they walked deeper into the maze, Mira caught the Lord studying her with an expression of curious fascination. Tell me about your curse, he requested. Mira sighed. A witch cursed me for stealing her potions, she deadpanned. Really? Lysander asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Mira snorted. No, she admitted with a grin. That was But Lysander's entire posture suddenly stiffened. You lied, he asked, while looking her in the eye no less. The words came out like an accusation, his voice rising with genuine shock. I'm sorry, Mira said quickly. I didn't mean to lie. I meant to joke. Lysander stared at her as if she'd confessed to some unspeakable perversion. For us mortals, sometimes a small untruth is kinder than a harsh reality, Mira said defensively. It's not easy to speak about my curse. You have no idea what it's like being trapped in a form that isn't truly yours. Lysander's expression grew unexpectedly somber. I have some idea, he said quietly. But there is no such thing as a small untruth. Falsehood is falsehood, and it corrupts everything it touches. The depth of his revulsion made Mira's stomach twist with remorse. I'm sorry, she repeated. Truly, I won't do it again. Would it? Would it help if I told you the real story about how I got cursed? Lysander studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My stepmother had a son from her previous mating, Cade, who she obviously favored. Mira told him the whole story and concluded. When I woke up, I was caught between forms, and Cade screamed when he saw me. He screamed? Lysander asked, confused. Because I look like this, obviously, Mira said, gesturing at herself. Lysander stared. Ugly, Mira clarified bluntly. But all mortals are ugly, Lysander replied matter-of-factly. None of you can cast glamour spells or shape your forms at will. Mira gaped. To him, all mortals seemed as ugly as her. Well, she explained, to other mortals I'm particularly monstrous. People fear me, accuse me of crimes, try to hurt me. Then why didn't you bargain for me to break your curse? Lysander asked. Surely that would solve your problems more completely than saving a handful of princesses. The question caught Mira off guard. I didn't want the princesses to die, she explained. Lysander shrugged. And why not? All mortals are the same. Deceitful, hateful, quick to turn on one another. Are the Fae any better? Mira asked. Probably worse, actually, Lysander smiled. But at least we don't lie. Why is truth so important to you? Mira asked, curious despite herself. Lysander paused, his expression growing serious. Because our words shape our world. When we speak, we don't merely describe reality. We have the power to make it so. His eyes met hers. A carelessly spoken word can reshape the very fabric of existence. Can bind or free, create or destroy. The weight of that revelation settled over Mira like a heavy cloak. No wonder the Fae were so careful with their language. Which is why you should make amends for lying to me, Lysander said, his tone returning to its earlier lightness. Didn't I do that already? Mira challenged. Lysander's answering smile was dazzling. Tell me your name, he requested. Your true name, not what others call you. Mira opened her mouth to answer, then stopped as understanding dawned. If words have power, she murmured, then names do too, don't they? Lysander's smirk was answer enough. Does that mean you won't tell me? He asked. Mira decided to play his game, answering question with question. When does my next task begin? She asked, changing the subject. Lysander's smile widened with wicked delight. Your next task, he asked. Oh, but it's already started. Mira froze, her smile vanishing completely. What did you just say? Panic replaced the pleasant warmth of their conversation. What do you mean it's already started? Why didn't you tell me? She demanded, her voice rising with fear and betrayal. She had been enjoying herself. Actually enjoying herself for the first time in years. And now she realized she'd been wasting precious time. I did tell you, Lysander protested. I told you the tasks would begin when you entered the maze. No, you didn't. She stopped, realizing he couldn't lie. Did you tell me while I was unconscious? She asked. Yes, the Fey Lord replied happily. You should really pay more attention. Mira spun around, taking in the towering hedge walls with new eyes. This wasn't a pleasant garden stroll. This was the trial. She was trapped in here while time ticked away, and she had no idea what she was supposed to do. May I know the rules? She asked through gritted teeth. I already told you those as well, Lysander smirked. You ought to listen more carefully. Mira fought back frustration. How much time do I have left? Lysander gestured ahead of them. Until the moon reaches its zenith, he said cheerfully. I can't see the moon, Mira protested. Good luck, Lysander said with a mocking little bow. And then he vanished, leaving Mira alone in the maze. Mira forced herself to think logically. The task had started when she entered the maze, so surely getting out of it must be the key to success. She began walking, trying to map the twisting pathways in her mind. Left turn, dead end. Right turn, another dead end. The hedge walls stretched impossibly high, their rose-covered surfaces beautiful but impenetrable. After what felt like an hour, desperation began to set in. But then she thought, what if this was another illusion? What if the walls only seemed real but could be passed through with enough determination? She pressed her palms against the nearest hedge wall, pushing with all her strength. The thorns bit into her skin. The branches felt solid and unyielding, but she kept pushing. Maybe if she just tried hard enough. What are you doing, child? Mira spun around to find a tiny old woman watching her with curious eyes. She was bent with age, her wrinkled face kind but weary. I'm trying to get out of this maze, Mira explained. You'd need to find an exit for that, the old woman said mildly. That's generally how mazes work. But these walls could still be illusory, Mira insisted. Can you feel them? The woman asked. Mira pressed her hand to the wall again. The thorns pricked her palm. Well, there's your answer then, the old woman said with a shrug and began to walk away. Wait, Mira hurried after her. Do you know the way out? Oh yes, the woman replied without stopping. Can you show me, please? The old woman paused, turning to look at Mira. I would, but that sounds awfully tedious, she said. Please, I really need to get out, Mira said desperately. Yes, they always need to get out, don't they? The old woman's voice carried the weight of infinite boredom. It's always the same. Who's they? A sea of faces, all identical in their desperation. She waved a dismissive hand. Have you met many people in this maze? Mira asked. I've met them all. I'm bound to this place, you see. The old woman settled onto a stone bench that Mira was certain hadn't been there moments before. You're stuck here? She asked. Indeed, child. And out of all these people you've met, who managed to get out? Mira asked. None, the woman replied with crushing finality. Mira's heart sank. There has to be a way, she moaned despairingly. I can't stay here. Oh, it's not so bad, the old woman said. There's a corner of the maze where nightingales have taken roost. They're quite lovely. How does that help me? Mira frowned. I don't know. The old woman shrugged. They're nightingales. Mira wanted to scream. Why don't you get out? She asked instead. If you know the way. I can't, the old woman sighed. The Fey Lord said I have to stay here. Why? Because he wants me to cry. The answer came matter-of-factly. He wants you to cry. Mira repeated. Indeed he does. He longs for my tears specifically. And you won't just try to cry? The old woman looked at her with something approaching pity. Of course I tried. But you have to feel something to cry, and I've long stopped feeling anything at all. Mira sighed. Sometimes I wish I could feel nothing, she said quietly. The old woman's expression grew sharp for the first time. You have no idea the emptiness that requires, she said. What's the point of living if not for emotions? Well, if the emotions are pain and sorrow and shame, Mira sighed. Pain and sorrow and shame at such a young age. The woman's voice carried genuine curiosity now. How interesting. Here was Mira's chance, she thought. If she could make this woman cry, maybe they could both get out. Mira took a shaky breath and began to pour her heart out. I was 12 when my mother died, she murmured. She was everything good in my world, and when she left me, I had no one. My father, he couldn't bear to look at me because I reminded him of her. So when he brought home his new wife and her perfect son, I thought, finally, I might have a family again. She let her voice break slightly. But I was wrong. Vera gave all her love to Cade, and I watched from doorways as they embraced, as he received every kindness I'd dreamed of. Mira's eyes filled with genuine tears. One day a man came to court me. For the first time, someone saw past appearances to value my mind. But Vera couldn't bear it. She brought me poisoned tea, smiling as she offered it. Her voice cracked. And I was so desperate for her approval that I drank every drop. She wiped her eyes dramatically. When I woke, I was trapped between forms, neither beautiful nor plain. My own pack banished me as if my curse might contaminate them. Mira's shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. And for 3 years, I've lived alone in the wilderness, watching children run from me in terror. I've been accused of crimes I didn't commit, hunted like the monster I've become. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her own cheeks. She peeked at the old woman's face, but her expression was perfectly blank. That's it? She asked, crossing her arms. That's your great tragedy? You're not as pretty as your stepbrother. You don't understand, Mira protested. She pulled back her veil, revealing her scarred face, her sunken eyes, the twisted features. The old woman's eyes widened. Then she began to laugh. She laughed and laughed, pointing at Mira with one gnarled finger. Oh, look at you, she wheezed between fits of mirth, crying so pathetically over a little bit of scarring. A little bit? Mira protested. I'm covered in it. This only made the woman laugh harder. You say that like it's something tragic, you silly thing. She doubled over, tears of laughter beginning to stream down her wrinkled cheeks. Then Lysander materialized beside the bench, a crystal vial in his hand. With practiced efficiency, he caught the tears falling from the old woman's cheeks. Well, he said to Mira with grudging admiration, you did make her cry, I suppose. Congratulations. The maze dissolved around them, revealing the crystal pavilion and the assembled Fey court. They burst into applause, their melodic voices ringing with genuine appreciation. You mean I passed? Mira asked Lysander. You did, he admitted. The old woman continued laughing, which only seemed to deepen his annoyance. Then, with a sound like crackling flames, she burst into smoke and transformed into a magnificent bird. Feathers of violet and silver, eyes like burning amethysts, and flew away. The moment Lysander materialized beside her bed the morning after the maze trial, Mira asked, Has my third task started? Better be safe than sorry. She would ask him every day now. No, Lysander replied. I thought we could see the Hall of Echoes today. The acoustics are quite remarkable. Mira blinked. The Hall of Echoes? Why would he need to show her that? She asked him again once they got there if this was part of her task. She also asked when he showed her the library, where books shifted their contents based on the reader's thoughts, and again when he led her through gardens where flowers changed colors in response to her moods. What about now? Has it started now? She pressed after he taught her to play a game with living chess pieces that moved upon command. Not yet, Lysander said, capturing her queen. Tell me, what do you think of our twilight sky? Some mortals find the eternal dusk unsettling. Mira glanced upward at the violet and amber heavens, then back at the board. It's beautiful, she shrugged. But when will my final task start? Surely the Alpha King. He won't have noticed, Lysander interrupted. Time moves differently in the mortal realm. By the following week, Mira found herself asking less frequently about the final trial. The question would rise to her lips, then fade as Lysander showed her some new wonder. You're quite good at riddles for someone so young, he said one evening, having spent the afternoon exchanging puzzles and wordplay with her. Young, Mira laughed. I'm 23. In Fae years, 23 is but a moment, he said, meeting her eyes. I have existed for centuries, little mortal. You are barely a heartbeat. He paused. And yet, Mira encouraged. Something flickered across his face. And yet, you entertain me. You think differently than others who have come here. I find you intriguing. Mira felt warmth spread through her chest at the admission. She hadn't thought she could inspire anything other than horror before, let alone intrigue. Perhaps that was why she started feeling more at home in the Fae court. Silver leaves began to fall from the trees, and she had yet to take her third trial. She had her own chambers now, and a sprite attendant, Pip, who brought meals that tasted like childhood memories and dreams made manifest. You're cheating, she accused one evening as Lysander's chess army surrounded her last defending pieces. I am doing no such thing, he protested. It's not my fault you failed to notice the enchantment on your knight piece. What enchantment? The one that makes him betray his own army if you move him to the 7th rank. Mira stared at the board in disbelief. That's the most ridiculous rule I've ever heard. Yet you fell for it quite thoroughly. Lysander's smile was triumphant. Perhaps you're not as clever as I thought. Before she could think better of it, Mira reached across the table and flicked his crystal king off the board. I win by default, she declared. Lysander burst into genuine laughter. The crystal trees had shed all their violet leaves and begun sprouting new growth of palest silver when Mira overheard the sprites gossiping near the fountain in the moon court. Poor princesses, one was saying with mock sympathy. Still dancing alone in those woods. How much longer do you think they'll last? Asked another, her voice bright with malicious curiosity. Oh, not long now. No one's coming to save them. The words hit Mira like ice water. The princesses. The dancing, dying princesses she had sworn to save. She pressed herself against the marble pillar, horrified by the realization that she couldn't immediately recall their faces. How long had it been since she'd thought of them? Days? Weeks? Mira fled before she could hear more, the sprite's laughter following her through the corridors. She wandered the palace in a daze until she found herself in a part of the garden she'd never seen before. Silver trees lined a peaceful grove, their branches heavy with fruit that gleamed like captured moonlight. She'd admired these trees on her first night here, drawn to their beauty and the inexplicable sadness they evoked. Lovely, aren't they? Pip's voice made her jump. The little sprite had followed her, hovering at her shoulder. The Lord's collection of champions. Mira frowned, looking at the trees. Champions? She repeated, confused. Why, yes, Pip said. You are looking at all the brave mortals who came to save the dancing princesses before you. They make such lovely additions to the garden. Mira stared at the silver trees in shock. That evening, when Lysander appeared with his usual chess set, she was ready for him. I want to take my third trial, she said before he could sit down. He paused, the crystal pieces half materialized in his hands. And you will, he said, when it pleases me. The princesses are dying, Mira said, her voice sharp. While I've been playing games and letting you distract me, they're dancing themselves to death. Which was all part of your plan, wasn't it? Why risk letting me take the trial and free them when you could just make me forget about them? Lysander kept silent. Gesturing toward the garden, she added, and all those people, all those champions you turned into trees, they had families, lives, people who loved them. Are you quite finished? Lysander interrupted. His gaze grew cold, his expression petulant. Haven't I given you everything you desired? He asked. Rich as safety? You are happy here, aren't you? With me. Mira pursed her lips, avoiding his eyes. His eyes were too beautiful, too distracting. What would it take? She asked quietly. For you to give me my trial? Lysander stared as if, kept silent long enough, she would drop the subject. Tell me your name, he said eventually, and there was something defeated in his voice. Your true name. Mira studied his face. He looked sad now, and she couldn't understand why. If I give you my name, you'll let me take my trial? she asked. Yes, Lysander agreed, though he didn't seem happy at the prospect. All right, Mira agreed. But if I succeed, you'll free the people in your grove. All of them. Turn them back from trees to their true forms. Lysander's eyes narrowed. Why bargain for strangers? He sneered. Ones who would fear your appearance reject you? Mira winced. Because no one deserves to be trapped forever, she said. Lysander was quiet for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. Very well. Give me your name, and if you succeed in your final trial, I will restore them all. She took a breath. Mira, she said softly. My name is Mira. Lysander's eyes widened, as if he hadn't expected her to actually tell him. Then his expression grew solemn, and she saw something that looked almost like regret flicker across his features. Then your final trial begins now, Mira, he said, and the world around them began to shift and change. The world dissolved around them, reforming into the most magnificent ballroom Mira had ever seen. Crystal pillars soared toward a ceiling painted with constellations that moved and danced, and the entire Fey court was present, dressed in their finest regalia. Your final trial, Lysander announced. You must find what you need to go home before the last dance ends. Mira looked around the vast ballroom. What am I looking for? She asked. That, Lysander said, is for you to discover. The music swelled, and couples began to glide across the dance floor. Though surely you won't refuse me one dance before you begin your search, Lysander asked. Mira shook her head. I should focus on the trial, she attempted. What harm could one dance do? Lysander interrupted. Before you win and leave me forever. Despite her better judgment, she found herself being led onto the floor. They began to move together, a dance that required no touching, their bodies weaving around each other in perfect synchronization. I've taught you well, Lysander murmured, his eyes never leaving hers as they circled each other. Heat rose in her cheeks, and Mira looked away. I should continue searching, she whispered. For what, I wonder, he smiled. What is it you truly need to return home? Before she could answer, he waved his hand, and the world shimmered around them. The ballroom remained, but everything else changed. The harsh sounds of a prison cart replaced the ethereal music. The scent of fear and unwashed bodies overpowered the perfume of night-blooming flowers. The Alpha King's brutal court materialized around them. This is what awaits you, Lysander said. Suspicion, hostility, a world that sees you as nothing but a monster. The vision faded, returning them to the crystal ballroom. But you don't have to go, he continued. You could stay here. As your prisoner, Mira snorted. As my queen, he replied. She stumbled slightly and stared at him with wide eyes. Stay, he repeated. Rule beside me. Never again hide what you are. You don't mean that, Mira whispered, eyes welling. You barely know me. I know you're clever enough to amuse my phoenix, brave enough to face impossible trials, kind enough to bargain for strangers' freedom. His eyes burned into hers. I know that in centuries of existence, no one has ever made me wish I were. He trailed off with a sigh. Wish you were what? Mira insisted. Whole, he said quietly. Before she could respond, he waved his hand again. The world shimmered, and suddenly she was standing before an enormous mirror framed in silver and starlight. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't the cursed creature she'd grown accustomed to. It was herself before the curse, but herself perfected. Her skin was smooth and unmarked, glowing with health and vitality. She wore a gown of midnight blue scattered with diamonds. This is how I see you, Lysander said, appearing behind her in the reflection. This is who you truly are. Tears gathered in her eyes as she stared at the vision of herself. Beautiful, regal, worthy of love. You could look like this always, he said softly. Never again would someone you love choose another over you. In the reflection, he stepped closer, his hands hovering near her shoulders as if he longed to touch but couldn't quite manage it. Stay with me, Mira. Be my queen and my equal. Let me give you everything your world denied you. She turned from the mirror to face him directly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The offer was everything she'd ever dreamed of. No more hiding. No more shame. No more loneliness. And the princesses? She asked, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. What of them? He stepped closer. You barely knew them. Does it truly matter? Of course it does. Why? His voice was genuinely puzzled. Why sacrifice yourself for strangers? Do they truly matter to you more than me? She stared up at him, this impossibly beautiful creature who offered her everything she'd ever wanted, looking saddened by the thought she may not care for him. She reached for him with her hand. "Lysander," she said softly. Her fingers passed through his cheek like mist. The shock of it hit her like cold water. He wasn't even here. He was just another illusion. "You're not real," she whispered, her hand falling to her side. Pain flashed across his features. Genuine, devastating pain that made her chest ache. "Mira, you tricked me," she said, backing away from him. "Even now you're trying to trick me." "I wish I hadn't had to," he said quietly. "I wish things could be different. But they're not." She looked around the ballroom, seeing it now for what it was. Another test. Another temptation designed to make her abandon her purpose. "Are you even real?" she asked, her voice breaking. "As real as I can be," he said, reaching for her in vain. "This isn't about finding an object, is it?" Mira shook her head. "It's about finding the will to leave." Lysander said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. "I won't abandon the princesses." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Not for beauty, not for power, not even for—" She swallowed hard. "Not even for you," she thought. But she kept that last part to herself. Something shifted in the air around them. The ballroom began to fade, the music growing distant, the other dancers becoming translucent as ghosts. "You have succeeded," Lysander said formally. "You found what you needed to go home." "My resolve," Mira guessed. "Yes, your resolve." He inclined his head in a gesture of surrender. "You may return to your realm, Mira of the mortal world. The princesses will accompany you, and those who were transformed into trees will be restored to their true forms, free to return to their own lives." The Fae court was gathering around them now, but their expressions weren't mocking or cruel. Instead, they watched with something like fascination. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Lysander's smile was beautiful and heartbreaking. "In a way," he said. The world began to spin around her, colors blending and reality shifting. The last thing she saw was his face, etched with longing and loss, before everything went white and she was falling back toward the mortal realm and the life she had chosen over him. Mira found herself standing in the Alpha King's palace once more, though the familiar space felt alien after the ethereal beauty of the Fae realm, lit only by flickering torches and braziers. Around her stood the 5 princesses, no longer pale and exhausted, but radiant with health and vitality. And behind them crowded dozens of people she'd never seen before, all blinking in confusion and wonder. The transformed champions. The people who had been trees. She should have felt triumph, Mira knew. Instead, a hollow ache filled her chest. "He never loved you," she told herself firmly. "It was all part of the trial." "What happened?" The Alpha King's voice boomed across the hall. "Where have you been? We've been searching for you all morning." "Morning?" Mira's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. She'd spent weeks in the Fae realm, but apparently here it hadn't even been a day. "Explain yourself immediately," the king commanded. "What sorcery is this?" Mechanically, Mira told her story. The Fae, the dancing compulsion, the trials. The words felt like ash in her mouth. What did any of it matter now? She'd done what was right and lost Lysander. "Fae magic," the Alpha snarled when she finished. "You expect me to believe this children's story?" "It's true," Mira said dully. "Prove it then. Show me this magic you claim to have witnessed." Mira gestured vaguely at the rescued people. "They were trees. Now they're not. That's your proof," she said. "I see a group of vagrants and criminals, nothing more. For all I know, you've made all this up." The accusation should have stung, but instead Mira found herself staring past the king's shoulder, her attention caught by something else entirely. A great silver tree still stood in the center of the hall. "You speak of bargaining with demons," the Alpha King continued. "That sounds like sorcery to me." "She's not a sorceress," the eldest princess stepped forward. "She saved our lives." More voices joined the chorus of support, but Mira barely heard them. She was studying the tree, a frown creasing her brow. Something was wrong. Everyone who had been transformed was supposed to be restored to their true form. But the tree remained exactly as it had always been. Wait, as it had always been. Her breath caught. She remembered admiring this very tree on her first night in the palace. She'd assumed it was one of the Alpha King's decorations, but she now knew trees like this didn't grow in the mortal realm. She'd only seen their like in one place, the Twilight Court. Mira deserves the reward that was promised, one of the princesses said. You owe her. I am king, the Alpha King growled. I don't owe anybody anything. The rescued champions murmured angrily at this, their voices rising in Mira's defense. Fine, the Alpha King said. Name your reward, girl. But don't expect me to give you my miracle tree, he added, following her gaze. Mira turned to face him. Where did it come from? She asked. What? The tree, Mira said. Where did you get it? The Alpha King crossed his arms. It's been in my family for generations, he replied. No one knows exactly since when. What about the legends our nurses used to tell us? One of the princesses interrupted, looking at Mira. Some ancestor supposedly won it in a contest with a fey creature. But that's impossible, the Alpha King snarled. The fey aren't real. Mira's blood turned to ice water. What kind of contest? She asked. Something in her voice made the king pause. Riddles, I think, or some sort of wager. The family legend says the fey lost and had to send something to decorate my ancestors' throne room. He waved dismissively. The creature supposedly said if he lost, the tree would stay forever. Forever? Mira gasped. Unless moonlight touched its leaves or some such nonsense, the king sighed. Mira's legs nearly gave out. Which is why no one is allowed to touch the tree, someone yelled from the back. We just collect the silver blossoms when they fall, but can never touch the leaves, just in case. Mira's mind raced. This wasn't a legend. It couldn't be, because she knew what moonlight meant. She'd learned that concept in Lysander's court. How the Fae used coded language, how words held power. Mira stared at the silver trunk. I've made my choice, she said. For my reward, I want moonlight to shine directly on this tree. Natural moonlight. The king stared at her. Moonlight, girl? You could ask for lands, titles, gold. I want moonlight on the tree. Natural moonlight. I want you to open the ceiling completely. That's the most ridiculous. You promised me any reward, Mira said. You swore it before your court and your daughters. The challenge hung in the air. Around the hall, nobles and servants alike watched with bated breath. Fine, the king bid out. Open the skylight above the tree. Guards moved to the great chains and pulleys that controlled the hall's ceiling panels. Mira held her breath. This was it, she thought, because moonlight meant freedom in the Fae tongue. And now moonlight poured down like liquid silver, and the entire tree began to shimmer. The transformation was breathtaking. Silver bark flowed like water, branches became limbs, leaves became hair. And when the radiance finally faded, Lysander stood where the tree had been, devastatingly beautiful. The entire court fell silent. Several people dropped to their knees. Even the Alpha King had gone pale, and Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. It was you, she breathed. Lysander's eyes found hers across the hall. Yes, and after 3 centuries of imprisonment, you have given me back both freedom and form. Why didn't you ask for help? Mira asked. Lysander's expression grew rueful. Words have power among my kind. Remember? To speak of my imprisonment directly could have made the binding permanent. Besides, I couldn't trust my court with such knowledge. Too many would have seen my vulnerability as an opportunity to claim my throne. He gestured around the hall with obvious disdain. And would you have trusted mortals with such a secret? You fool, Mira said, tears gathering in her eyes. You were trapped as a tree for 300 years. Not anymore, he said softly. Thanks to you. He looked around the room. For centuries, I was forced to rule my realm as a projection, an illusion cast from this prison of bark and root. He gestured to where the tree had stood before addressing Mira. Every conversation we had, every moment we shared, I was speaking to you from this very spot, unable to be fully present. I would have helped you, she murmured sadly. Surely you know that. Lysander's expression grew pained. At first, I didn't trust you. You were just another mortal. And later, he sighed. Later, we had made a bargain. If you succeeded in your trials, you had to leave. If you failed, you had to become a statue. His voice dropped to a whisper. I couldn't bear either outcome. Mira stared at him. You didn't want me to win or lose, she whispered. I wanted you to stay, he admitted. I wanted to keep you with me, safe and whole in mine. Nonsense, the Alpha King snarled. You could have asked for anything, girl. Wealth, lands, titles. Instead, you'll leave here poor and still cursed, having betrayed our kingdom. Your kingdom doesn't deserve her, Lysander replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Mira is worth more than all your gold and lands combined. His expression softened as he turned back to her. Come back with me. Be my queen in truth this time, not as part of some trial. Mira stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. Is this another trick? In answer, he reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. His touch was warm, solid, real. No trick, he said softly. Though I warn you, I may spend eternity making up for every moment I couldn't truly hold you. Will I be your queen forever? Mira asked, her words carrying the careful precision she'd learned in his court. Lysander's eyes lit with approval and affection. Forever and always, until the stars burn out and beyond, he replied solemnly. And I shall not share you with others. You will be mine alone, she pressed. Yours alone in this life and whatever comes after, he promised. And you will love me, Mira continued, watching his face intently. Only me above all. Only you for all eternity, Lysander said, his voice growing warmer with each vow. Mira smiled as she walked over to him, reaching for his hand. And we will be equals, partners in all things? She asked, lifting her chin. In all things, he promised solemnly, his smile radiant. My equal in power, in rule, in love. Mira took his offered hand, and the moment their fingers intertwined, magic blazed through the hall. Light surrounded her, and she felt her curse dissolving. When the light faded, gasps echoed through the hall. She stood transformed, glowing with confidence and power and the unmistakable aura of Fey royalty. I don't understand, she said wonderingly. My curse should only break if someone chose to bond with me willingly while seeing me as I was. Lysander's grin was radiant. You just made me promise to love you alone forever, to be yours exclusively, and to treat you as an equal partner in all things, he said. By Fey law, those are marriage vows. And the moment I agreed, we were wed. Mira gaped in shock. You tricked me, she accused, but she was laughing through her tears of joy. Of course I did, he said, pulling her close. And I shall trick you many more times, just as you will undoubtedly trick me. After all, you are now my queen and equal. Deception is one of our greatest arts. The princesses began to cheer, and the sound spread through the hall as others joined in celebration. And then Lysander kissed her, the kiss she'd dreamed of through all their impossible courtship, real and warm and full of promise. Around them, the hall erupted in joy, but Mira heard none of it. There was only Lysander, solid and present in hers, and the moonlight streaming down to bless their union. The fairy tale, at last, had found its happy ending. Mira woke in chambers more magnificent than any dream. Walls of polished moonstone, silken curtains that shifted colors with the light, and a bed carved from living crystal that somehow felt softer than clouds. For a moment, she thought it was all an illusion. Then she felt the warmth beside her, and turned to find Lysander watching her with those violet silver eyes. Good morning, wife, he said, and the word sent a thrill through her. Good morning, husband, she replied, testing the word on her tongue. It felt strange and wonderful. He reached out and traced her cheek with one finger. A real touch, solid and warm. I've waited 3 centuries to do this, he murmured. Touch me, she asked. Wake beside you, he corrected. Touch you. Hold you. Stop pretending I don't long for these things. Mira's breath caught. You really wanted me to stay. More than I've wanted anything in 300 years, he admitted. Do you know what it was like? Watching you through the trials, unable to truly be there? Every time you looked at me, I was projecting myself from that cursed tree, helpless to do more than observe. You could have told me, Mira said softly, and risk you pitying me? Risk you choosing to stay out of obligation rather than desire. He shook his head. I needed to know you would choose me freely. You manipulated the entire situation, she pointed out. Of course I did. His smile was unrepentant. I'm Fey. We don't court, we scheme. We don't woo, we bargain. And I bargained for your heart without you even realizing it. Mira should have been angry, but instead she found herself laughing. What am I going to do with you? Rule beside me, he said seriously. Challenge me. Keep me honest when I slip into my worst tendencies. Remind me why mortals matter. Do they, she asked, matter to you? Lysander was quiet for a moment. They do now, he said finally. One mortal, at least, matters more than all the magic in my realm. The days that followed were a whirlwind of introductions and adjustments. The Fey court, which had watched her trials with such amusement, now bowed to her as their lady. Pip, her sprite attendant, took gleeful pleasure in dressing her in gowns of starlight and shadow. You're a proper queen now, the sprite chirped. No more hiding behind veils. But adjusting to life without her curse proved harder than Mira expected. She kept reaching for veils that weren't there, flinching when people looked at her directly. "They're staring," she whispered to Lysander during her first formal court gathering. "Of course they are," he replied. "You're beautiful, powerful, and you've accomplished what no mortal has in centuries. They'd be fools not to stare." "I'm not used to this kind of attention," Mira admitted. Lysander took her hand, pulling her close. "Then let's give them something to really stare at," he said, and kissed her in front of the entire assembled court. The Fae erupted in applause and delighted laughter. When they finally broke apart, Mira was breathless and blushing. "You did that on purpose," she accused. "I'm establishing that you're mine," he said unapologetically. "And I'm yours. Let there be no confusion about that." But not everything was celebration and romance. That evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Lysander grew serious. "There's something you need to understand about being Fae Queen," he said. "Our world operates on different rules than yours. Words have power here. Bargains are binding. And there are those who will test you." "Test me how?" Mira asked. "They'll try to trick you into unfavorable bargains. They'll use wordplay to trap you. They'll question whether a mortal, even one transformed, can truly rule the Twilight Court. And what do you think?" Mira asked, studying his face. "Can I? You outwitted me 3 times, he said. "You freed me from a binding that lasted 3 centuries. You chose duty over desire, then found a way to have both." His smile was proud. "If anyone can rule beside me, it's you." "But," Mira pressed, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But you'll need to be ruthless sometimes," he admitted. "The Fae respect strength. They'll exploit any perceived weakness. The kindness that made you save those princesses, that made you bargain for strangers. It's beautiful, but here it could be dangerous." Mira nodded slowly. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me how to be kind and ruthless. How to care about others without letting them take advantage." Lysander's expression softened. "That," he said, "is exactly why you'll be a better ruler than I ever was alone." The following week, Mira faced her first real test. A delegation arrived from the summer court, radiant Fae with golden skin and eyes like molten amber. Their spokesman, a lord named Aurelius, bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "We've come to meet the mortal who captured our northern neighbor's heart," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness, "and to offer our congratulations on your unexpected elevation." Mira heard the insult hidden in the compliment. Unexpected elevation, as if she didn't deserve her position. "How kind of you to travel so far," she replied evenly. "Though I must correct you, I'm no longer mortal." The transformation was quite thorough. Of course," Aurelius waved dismissively. "Though one does wonder if the inner nature changes as easily as the outer form." Lysander's hand tightened on the armrest of his throne, but Mira placed her own hand over his. A silent request to let her handle this. "You raise an interesting point," she said to Aurelius. "After all, I spent years as something considered monstrous by my own kind. I learned what it means to be judged by appearance rather than substance. Tell me, Lord Aurelius, do you believe your golden beauty makes you superior? Or are you wise enough to know that even the loveliest shell can house a rotten core?" The court went silent. Aurelius's smile turned brittle. "I meant no offense, Your Grace," he said stiffly. "Of course you didn't," Mira replied with false sweetness matching his own. "Just as I'm sure you don't mean offense when you come bearing no gifts, offer no trade agreements, and seem to have traveled all this way simply to satisfy your curiosity about whether a former mortal is worthy of her crown." She leaned forward. "Allow me to satisfy that curiosity. I am worthy, not because I was transformed, but because I earned my place through wit, courage, and compassion, qualities I notice are sadly lacking in your own delegation." Aurelius's face flushed. "The summer court will remember this insult." "Good," Mira said calmly. "Then you'll also remember that the Twilight Court is no longer ruled by one Fae Lord alone, but by 2 monarchs of equal power. And this queen does not tolerate veiled threats or false courtesy." The summer court delegation departed in angry silence. When they were gone, Lysander pulled Mira into his arms, laughing. "That was magnificent," he said. "Did you see his face when you called out his rudeness? Was I too harsh?" Mira asked, suddenly uncertain. "You were perfect," Lysander assured her. "You defended your position without losing your composure. You called out his insult without descending to pettiness. That's exactly the kind of strength this court needs to see." Pip flew over, bouncing excitedly. "The servants are already spreading the story. They're calling you the Queen of Sharp Truths. Mira groaned. That's a terrible title. I think it's fitting, Lysander grinned. After all, you've always seen through my tricks and games. Why shouldn't everyone else benefit from that same clarity? That night, as they prepared for bed, Mira found herself reflecting on how much had changed. A month ago, she'd been Hideface, the cursed wanderer that children sang songs about. Now she was a fey queen, married to an ancient lord, ruling a magical realm. Do you ever regret it? She asked Lysander as he braided her hair, a nightly ritual he'd insisted on. Binding yourself to me? You could have chosen anyone. His hands stilled. Regret binding myself to the woman who freed me from 3 centuries of imprisonment? The one who chose honor over desire, then found a way to claim both? The one who makes me laugh and challenges me and sees me as I truly am? He turned her to face him. Mira, I don't regret a single moment. Not the trials, not the bargains, not the tricks. Because they led to this, to you here, real and mine, and choosing to stay. I love you, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Lysander's entire expression transformed, softened and brightened simultaneously. I love you too, he said, though I suspect you've known that for some time. I hoped, Mira admitted. But with you, it's hard to tell what's real and what's manipulation. This is real, he promised, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Everything from this moment forward is real. No more illusions. No more tricks. Just us. I don't believe that for a second, Mira laughed. You'll never stop being tricky. Well, perhaps small tricks, he amended with a grin. Harmless ones. The kind that make you laugh rather than doubt. I can live with that, Mira said, pulling him down beside her. And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by magic and moonlight, Mira realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not beauty, not acceptance from those who'd rejected her, but a place where she belonged, exactly as she was. Weeks passed in a blur of council meetings, diplomatic dinners, and learning the intricate dance of fey politics. Mira discovered that being queen involved far more than wearing beautiful gowns and sitting beside Lysander on a throne. It meant mediating disputes between noble houses who'd been feuding for centuries. It meant understanding the delicate balance of power between the seasonal courts. It meant learning which traditions were sacred and which could be challenged. The spring court wants to renegotiate the water-sharing agreement, Lysander said one morning, reviewing a stack of crystalline tablets that served as official correspondence. They claim the terms favor us unfairly. Mira looked up from her own reading, a history of intercourt relations that was proving both fascinating and headache-inducing. Do they? Of course they do, Lysander said without shame. I negotiated that treaty 200 years ago when I had significantly more leverage. They were desperate, and I took advantage. That doesn't seem very fair, Mira observed. Fairness is a mortal concept, he replied. The Fae operate on advantage and opportunity. Mira set down her book. And what do we operate on now? Now that you have a mortal, a former mortal, as your co-ruler? Lysander considered this. An interesting question. What do you think we should operate on? Mutual benefit, Mira said. If we want stable alliances, we need the other courts to trust that agreements with us won't be exploitative. Yes, we should negotiate from strength, but not to the point where we create resentment. You want to renegotiate the treaty? Lysander asked, sounding more curious than opposed. I want to review it and see if there's room for adjustment that strengthens our relationship with Spring Court without significantly weakening our position, Mira clarified. There's a difference between being fair and being foolish. Lysander's smile was approving. You're learning quickly. Very well. The Spring Court delegation arrives next week. We'll hear their proposal together. The Spring Court arrived in a procession of blooming vines and flowering trees that seemed to grow wherever they walked. Their queen, Alara, was a vision of natural beauty, skin like bark, hair like cascading wisteria, eyes the green of new leaves. Lord Lysander, she greeted with a bow. And the famous Queen Mira. We've heard much about you. All terrible, I hope, Mira replied with a slight smile. Alara laughed, genuine and warm. Actually quite the opposite. They say you speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, and that you convinced our stubborn northern neighbor to reconsider agreements he made centuries ago. Only when those agreements no longer serve their original purpose, Mira said carefully. The negotiations lasted 3 days. Alara's delegation argued that changing climate patterns in the mortal realm had affected water flow between their territories, making the original agreement unsustainable. Lysander countered that the Spring Court had failed to maintain certain watershed protections they'd agreed to. Mira found herself mediating between them, asking questions neither had considered. What if we adjusted the water allocation seasonally? She suggested on the second day. Spring Court needs more during their growing season, but Twilight Court needs more during our summer months. Could we create a rotating schedule that addresses both needs? Elara and Lysander exchanged glances. That could work, Elara said slowly, though we'd need guarantees about minimum flows. And penalties for failing to meet watershed protection standards, Lysander added, looking at Mira with something like pride. By the third day, they'd hammered out a new agreement that left both sides satisfied if not entirely happy, which Mira had learned was the mark of a successful negotiation. You have a gift for this, Elara told Mira privately as her delegation prepared to depart. For seeing solutions that satisfy multiple interests. The Fae tend to think in terms of winners and losers, advantage and disadvantage. You think in terms of mutual benefit. Is that a weakness? Mira asked. In the old courts, perhaps, Elara smiled. But times are changing. The mortal world's magic is failing, and that affects all of us. We need alliances based on more than temporary advantage. We need relationships built on trust. She glanced toward where Lysander stood discussing final details with her advisors. He's different with you, you know. Less calculating. More present. He was trapped as a tree for 300 years, Mira said quietly. That changes a person. Perhaps, Elara agreed. Or perhaps having someone who sees him clearly, who loves him for who he is rather than what he can provide, has reminded him that connection matters more than control. That night, Mira found Lysander in the palace library, staring at a shelf of ancient texts. What are you thinking about? She asked, sliding her arms around him from behind. How different things are now, he said, turning to pull her close. How different I am. Do you miss it? The way things were before. Before I was imprisoned. Yes. Before you? Never. He kissed her forehead. You've made me remember why I became a lord in the first place. Not to accumulate power, but to protect my people and maintain balance between the realms. You were doing that, Mira pointed out. You kept the dancing princesses alive as long as possible. You gave champions chances to prove themselves. You maintained treaties even when you could have broken them. I was going through the motions, Lysander corrected, following old patterns without remembering their purpose. You've reminded me that rules exist to serve the people, not the other way around. Mira rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and real and hers. I have a confession, she said softly. Oh, his voice held amusement. Have you been deceiving me, wife? I still have nightmares sometimes, she admitted. I dream that I wake up and I'm back in the mortal realm, cursed and alone. That all of this was an illusion. Lysander's arms tightened around her. This is real, he promised. You are here. You are mine. And I am yours. No illusion, no trick. How can I be sure? The question came out smaller than she intended. In answer, Lysander took her hand and placed it over his heart. Feel that. That beats for you. Only you. It has since the moment you solved my first trial, and I realized you might actually succeed. Might actually leave me. He cupped her face in his hands. I was terrified. For the first time in centuries, I felt something other than boredom or rage at my imprisonment. I felt hope and fear and desire and longing. You made me feel alive again. Tears gathered in Mira's eyes. I was so lonely before, she whispered. For so long. Sometimes I'm afraid this is too good to be true. Then let me prove it to you, Lysander said. Every day for the rest of our very long lives, I will prove that you belong here, that you are loved, that you are home. He kissed her then, deep and slow and filled with promises. When they finally broke apart, Mira was breathless and smiling. You know what the best part is, she said. What? I don't have to hide anymore. Not my face, not my thoughts, not my heart. You see all of me, and you choose me anyway. I see all of you, Lysander agreed, and I choose you because of it, not in spite of it. Your cleverness, your kindness, your stubborn insistence on doing what's right even when it's difficult. These are the things I love most about you. Mira pulled him toward the door. Come to bed, husband. I think we've done enough ruling for one day. As my queen commands, he said with exaggerated formality. She swatted his arm, and his laughter echoed through the library as they made their way back to their chambers, hand in hand, surrounded by magic and moonlight and the promise of tomorrow. 6 months had passed since Mira became queen of the Twilight Court, and she was beginning to understand what Lysander had meant about Fae politics being complicated. The Autumn Court had accused them of harboring fugitives. The Winter Court wanted to renegotiate border agreements. And just yesterday, a minor noble had challenged Mira's right to rule, citing an obscure law that supposedly forbade mortals from holding positions of power. Mira had dealt with it by asking the noble to define mortal in legal terms, then systematically demonstrated that by every measure, lifespan, magical ability, resistance to iron, she no longer qualified. The noble had left in frustrated silence, but she knew it wouldn't be the last challenge. "You handled Lord Thorn brilliantly," Lysander said as they walked through the moonlit gardens that evening. "Though I suspect he'll try again with a different argument." "Let him try," Mira said. "I've learned from the best deceiver in the realm how to use words as weapons." "I'm not sure whether to be proud or concerned," Lysander laughed. "Be both," she suggested. "I am." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, past silver trees and crystalline fountains, until they reached a secluded alcove overlooking the valley below. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Mira said, settling onto a marble bench. "That sounds ominous," Lysander replied, sitting beside her. "It's about the princesses," she said, "and all the others who came before me. Why did you really keep them dancing? Why not just refuse their eldest sister's bargain from the start?" Lysander was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was hoping," he said finally. "Hoping for what? That someone would be clever enough to figure it out. That someone would care enough to try. That someone would see past the monster in the tree and realize I was trapped." He turned to face her. "Every champion who came was a test. Every trial was a hope. And for 300 years, no one succeeded. They either gave up, or they failed, or they returned to your alpha king with wild stories that no one believed. Until me," Mira said softly. "Until you," he agreed. "You, who had been cursed and rejected and called a monster, but who still chose to save strangers. You, who solved every trial not through magic or strength, but through cleverness and compassion. You who saw me, truly saw me, even when I was nothing but an illusion and a voice." Mira took his hand. "You were never nothing." "I felt like nothing," Lysander admitted. "Trapped, powerless, watching my court from a distance while pretending to rule. Unable to touch, unable to be touched. Slowly going mad from isolation." "Why didn't the binding break when your opponent died?" Mira asked. "Surely that should have ended the wager." "Because I was too clever in my phrasing," Lysander said bitterly. "I said the tree would stay forever, unless moonlight touched its leaves. I thought I was being poetic. I didn't realize I was creating a binding condition that would outlast the mortal who'd trapped me." "Words have power," Mira murmured, repeating the lesson she'd learned. "They do. And I spent 3 centuries learning that lesson in the cruelest way possible." He squeezed her hand. "But it brought me to you, so I can't truly regret it." The following week brought news from the mortal realm. A messenger arrived bearing a letter sealed with the Alpha King's mark. Mira broke the seal and read aloud. "To the former Hideface, now styling herself queen of some fairy realm. Your stepmother Vera and her son Cade have been arrested for practicing forbidden magic. Upon investigation, we discovered evidence of multiple curses, including the one inflicted upon you. They have confessed under questioning and been sentenced to exile. Your presence is not required at their trial, but I thought you should know that justice has been served. The princesses send their regards and wish you well in your new life. Alpha King Magnus." Mira stared at the letter, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions. Justice. After all these years, there was finally justice. "How do you feel?" Lysander asked gently. "I don't know," Mira admitted. "Relieved? Vindicated? But also empty. I thought I'd feel triumphant if they ever faced consequences, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for them. Sad for all of us," she clarified. "For the years I lost to that curse. For the family I never had. For Cade, who was raised by a woman who taught him that cruelty was strength." She set the letter down. "But also grateful. Because if Vera hadn't cursed me, I would have married that beta and lived an ordinary life. I never would have come here. Never would have met you." "Are you saying you're grateful for your curse?" Lysander asked carefully. "I'm saying I'm grateful for where it led me," Mira corrected. "The curse itself was horrible. The loneliness, the fear, the rejection. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But it taught me to see past appearances. It taught me that worth isn't determined by beauty or status. And it brought me here, to a place where I finally belong. Lysander pulled her close. You know what I think? What? I think Vera did me the greatest favor anyone ever could, he said. She sent you on a path that led straight to me. She thought she was destroying you, but instead she set you free. Mira considered this. That's a very Fae way of looking at it. You're Fae now, he pointed out. You might as well start thinking like one. Does that mean I should start scheming and plotting? She teased. Oh, you already do that, Lysander grinned. You just call it diplomacy and strategic negotiation. Mira laughed, and the sound echoed through the chamber, light and genuine and free. That night, as they prepared for the monthly court gathering, Mira stood before her mirror and barely recognized herself. Gone was the girl in veils and shame. In her place stood a woman who radiated confidence and power. Her gown was woven from twilight itself, shifting between violet and silver with every movement. Her hair was crowned with a circlet of moonstone. Her eyes, once haunted, now sparkled with intelligence and joy. You're staring, Lysander said, coming up behind her. I'm remembering, she replied. How I used to look at mirrors and see a monster. How I couldn't stand my own reflection. And now I see a queen, Mira said softly. Not because my appearance changed, but because I finally learned to see my own worth. Lysander rested his chin on her shoulder, meeting her eyes in the mirror. You were always worthy. The curse didn't diminish that. It just made it harder for others to see. And for me to see it in myself, Mira added. They stood there for a moment, reflected together. Lord and lady, husband and wife, two souls who had found each other across impossible odds. Ready? Lysander asked. Ready, Mira confirmed. Hand in hand, they walked to the throne room where the Fae court waited. The assembled nobles bowed as they entered, not just to Lysander, but to both of them equally. Mira took her seat on the throne that had been created for her, carved from living crystal and inlaid with silver and amethyst. Beside her, Lysander settled into his own throne, reaching over to take her hand. Let the court session begin, he announced. And as petitioners brought their disputes and delegates presented their proposals, Mira felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. Not hidden away in shame, not wandering alone in the wilderness, but here, visible, powerful, loved. She was no longer Hideface, the cursed wanderer. She was Queen Mira of the Twilight Court, co-ruler of the Fae realm, wife to Lysander, and finally home. Epilogue. Years passed in the Twilight Court, measured not in mortal time, but in the slow turning of seasons and the gradual shifts of political alliances. Mira became known throughout the Fae realms as the Queen of Balanced Justice, neither cruel nor soft, but fair in ways that even the other courts had to respect. She maintained contact with the mortal realm, ensuring that the dancing princesses never forgot what had been done for them. In return, they helped bridge the gap between worlds, fostering understanding between mortal and Fae. Vera and Cade lived out their exile in the far reaches of the mortal territories. Mira never sought them out, but she heard they'd been humbled by their fall from grace. She hoped they'd learned something from it, but she didn't particularly care either way. They were part of her past, and she'd built a future that had nothing to do with them. Lysander grew softer with the years, or perhaps Mira simply learned to see the softness that had always been there beneath the trickster's facade. He still schemed and plotted, but now he did it with her, not against her. They became partners in the truest sense, challenging each other, supporting each other, loving each other with a depth that neither had thought possible. And on quiet nights, when the court was asleep and the palace was peaceful, they would walk through the moonlit gardens and remember. Remember the trials that brought them together. Remember the loneliness that made them appreciate connection. Remember the curses that paradoxically set them free. Do you ever miss it? Lysander asked one such night. Your mortal life? The simplicity of it? Never, Mira replied without hesitation. That life was about hiding and surviving. This life is about being seen and thriving. There's no comparison. No regrets. Only one, she said, and when he looked alarmed, she smiled. I regret that I didn't meet you sooner. Though I suppose if we had, I wouldn't have been ready for you. No, Lysander agreed. You needed to be broken first, so you could understand what it meant to be whole. Just as I needed to be imprisoned, so I could appreciate freedom. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the spot where the silver tree had once stood in the mortal realm, now marked in their garden by a single moonstone pillar. "Thank you," Lysander said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing past the tree. For solving the riddles. For choosing to stay. For loving me even when I was nothing but tricks and illusions." Mira turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "You were never nothing. And I didn't choose to stay despite the tricks. I chose to stay because you cared enough to create them. Every trial, every test, every moment we spent together was you trying to keep me close without admitting that's what you wanted." "I'm admitting it now," he said. "I wanted you. I want you. I will always want you." "Good," Mira smiled. "Because you're stuck with me for eternity." "Best bargain I ever made," Lysander replied, and kissed her beneath the stars. And they lived, not happily ever after, because life was never that simple, but happily enough, challenged and loved and seen and home. The end.